From deep in the earth come clues to a mystery nearly 2,000 years old. They died instantly, victims of a volcano's wrath. But only now are we beginning to piece together the mosaic that tells of their tragic final hours. Pulsing with an electric energy uniquely its own, southern Italy is also the intimate companion of destruction and death. Active for 17,000 years, Mount Vesuvius erupted most recently in 1944, devastating 2 towns. Only a few miles from Vesuvius, another town lives with yet a different threat. Here the sea appears to be boiling. The earth regularly grumbles and groans, and sulfuric gases choke the air. Vesuvius slumbers, one scientist wrote, but his heart is still awake. A microcosm of our eternal battle with forces. Washed by the placid waters of the Bay of Naples, the region of Campania has long attracted poets and travelers, emperors and kings. 2,000 years ago, writers described Campania as the most blessed land, the fairest of all regions, not only in Italy, but in all the world. A place where the summers are cool and winters warm, and where the sea dies away gently as it kisses the shore. The climate and extraordinarily rich soil enabled farmers then, as now, to grow grapes, olives, and up to 4 seed crops a year. But 2,000 years ago, few understood that the richness of the soil was a gift from the mountain in their midst, that the mountain was in fact a volcano. Today we know Mount Vesuvius as one of the most famous and infamous volcanoes in history. The most active volcano on the mainland of Europe, it has erupted some 50 times since the Roman era. Looming over a metropolis vastly expanded since Roman times, Vesuvius, the flaming mountain, is no less of a threat today. Today, Vesuvius's shadow falls on some 2 million people in the greater Naples area, one of the most densely populated urban areas in all of Europe. Nowhere else in the Western world do such vast numbers dwell in the immediate vicinity of an active volcano. Though most Neapolitans either don't know or refuse to believe that Vesuvius is an active volcano, local scientists are on 24-hour alert. Seismic information from throughout the region is continually monitored. With no practical civil defense plan possible if caught unaware, the goal is to accumulate enough data to be able to develop an early warning system. The science of plate tectonics tells us that the Earth's outer shell is composed of about a dozen rigid plates that are in continuing motion. The movements cause the plates to clash in several ways. One is called subduction, in which one plate grinds beneath another. As this happens, the heat of the Earth's interior creates magma, hot liquid rock. In this way, about 80% of the world's volcanoes are formed. Along the coast of Italy, subduction has created an entire string of volcanoes. The most famous in Italy, and perhaps the world, is Mount Vesuvius. Here, the power of nature's forces has been felt at Pozzuoli, Naples itself, San Sebastiano, and two towns made famous when Vesuvius buried them in 79 AD, Herculaneum and Pompeii. Lost and forgotten for more than 1,600 years, Pompeii is one of the great archaeological sites of the world, as much for its poignant story as for its historical significance. Lying 6 miles from the foot of Vesuvius, Pompeii was a thriving Roman commercial center of some 15,000 people, specializing in the export of wine, fish sauce, and woolen cloth. Its boundless prosperity was reflected in the name of its main road, Street of Abundance. Kept safe from the ravages of time by the very volcanic debris that buried it, Pompeii is the largest site of the ancient world so completely preserved. In addition to homes and shops, Pompeii had its own marketplaces, baths, and theaters. More than 100 taverns and inns catered to merchants and traders arriving by land and sea from the farthest reaches of the Roman Empire. Bakers were among the busiest tradesmen. Grain was ground into flour in stone mills turned by animals or slaves. In the oldest known Roman amphitheater, built 100 years before the Colosseum in Rome, 20,000 spectators thrilled to sporting events, gladiator contests, and battles with wild animals. Soon after excavation was begun, Pompeii's name swept the Western world, and its art and architecture had a profound effect on European and American culture. A Pompeii fever compelled painters and sculptors throughout Europe to make pilgrimages here. Neoclassicism was fueled as a major art form and remained the standard for the 18th and 19th centuries. Pompeians depicted the wine god Bacchus clothed in grapes, as was the fertile Vesuvius itself. With no record of eruption in living memory, they saw it as merely a mountain, beautiful and benign. On that fateful August day in 79 AD, thousands fled the city at the mountain's first outburst. For those who tarried, the end was sudden and violent, a painful, choking death from asphyxiation by gases and ash. Their bodies were packed in the dry ash, which hardened over the years into hollow outlines of the dead. When the forms were discovered in the 1860s, plaster was injected into them, creating these faithful images of the victims at their very moment of death. Eight miles northwest of Pompeii is the modern-day town of Herculaneum. It is built atop a buried ancient town, Herculaneum, which was silenced in the same eruption as Pompeii. The earliest part of Herculaneum to be discovered still remains hidden underground because occupied homes and stores lie above it. All traces of Herculaneum had been lost until 1709. Even writings about the once elegant town had disappeared or been destroyed. The rebirth of Herculaneum began with its accidental discovery by a well digger. Searching for water, he struck instead what turned out to be a Roman theater. Later, excavators knew they had found ancient Herculaneum when they uncovered marble inscribed with its name in Latin. In one of the dark tunnels, a haunting image from the past, an impression left in the volcanic debris by a statue toppled from its pedestal. Magnificent treasures were uncovered, and when word of them spread, the ruling nobility of Naples recklessly looted the theater. Tunnels were ordered dug and searched, and a massive hole was cut to haul out the exquisite marble and priceless bronze statues. Then, except for sporadic digging, Herculaneum was all but forgotten once again. More than 100 years later, excavating begins in earnest, when the fascist government allocates large sums to preserve Roman antiquities. Ton after ton of volcanic debris is hauled away. Only then does the ancient town begin to emerge. Pompeii had been relatively easy to excavate, yet here at Herculaneum, workers struggled through 40 to 60 feet of material as hard as cement. Why this difference, scientists puzzle? Why was Pompeii covered by gravel and ash, and Herculaneum by a rock-solid deposit when the two towns were buried in the same eruption? Unlike the commercial center of Pompeii, Herculaneum was a residential and resort town. Built on a low bluff overlooking the sea, it housed between 4,000 and 5,000 wealthy retired citizens, artisans, and fishermen. The most notable gathering places in Herculaneum were the bathhouses. Heated by fires and tended by slaves, the baths drew residents almost daily. With separate sections for women and men, the baths were a place to relax, socialize, and conduct business. Now, based on records from the past, with the help of an artist's hand, Herculaneum is magically recaptured as it was in the glorious days of the Roman Empire. They left us images magnificently cast in bronze. But where were the people themselves? Few human remains had ever been found, and scholars concluded that surely the people of Herculaneum had successfully escaped. The extraordinary number of everyday objects provides an intimate look at Roman life. A cloth press in a cleaner's shop. The remains of a bed. A baby's charred cradle. A charred doll. Magnificent jewelry, hand-hammered from the purest of gold. And costume jewelry of beads, stones, and amber. And perhaps most astounding of all, food set on the table. Walnuts, freshly baked bread, eggs, and figs preserved for nearly 2,000 years. In 1980, more than 270 years after the initial discovery of Herculaneum, a skeleton, was uncovered on the site of the ancient beachfront. Then 3 more were found there, igniting the archaeological community. The arched chambers facing the beach had never been excavated. Now they cried out for attention. Yet no one was prepared for the landmark discovery that would destroy scientific theory on Herculaneum's final hours. Many Herculaneans had not escaped. Huddled together in the dark recesses of the chambers, scores were overtaken by Vesuvius's indiscriminate rampage. Perhaps members of the same family, one group died locked in embrace. Some of the victims were found wearing valuables, gold and shining gems. Others, no doubt certain they would escape, gathered their treasure troves and carried them as they fled. Today, the cataclysm that brought instant death has become an unparalleled legacy for modern scientists. Analysis of the bones may answer some of history's riddles about Roman culture and daily life. Physical anthropologist Dr. Sarah Beisel has spent her career analyzing human bones, but this opportunity is unique.
The reason why the Herculanean population is so important is that it may well be the only one we ever have from the Roman period in Italy, because Roman burials were cremations and so aren't studyable. And we've had artifacts before, we've had architectural remains, we've had literature, but this is the first time we've had real people, and I find it very moving.
Working with chief excavator Ciro Fomocola, Beisel uncovers treasures locked in the earth for nearly 2,000 years. A magnificent bracelet is found alongside a woman's remains. No doubt a person of wealth, she was found with much gold jewelry.
I think she must have had them in her purse, since her arm is off in another direction. Oh, this one has a little chain.
Her earrings, meant for pierced ears, were probably decorated with pearls, and as she ran, she carried a bronze oil lamp, futile protection against the dark.
I take them out of the ground because they talk to me then. They don't talk to me as much in the ground as they do to other people. But when I get them out, then they tell me what they did all their lives and what they did every day. And they say whether they're male or female, their ages, what kind of work they did, whether they were abused when they were alive, what sort of nutrition they had, if they were sick. Well, I can't see all the illnesses, but some of them, they can tell me that. The women can tell me how many babies they had. They can't tell me whether they were happy or not. Questo a notizia.
From a pelvic bone, Beisel is able to tell the woman's approximate age and how many babies she had.
27 anni, 2-3 bambini.
She was roughly 27 years old and had 2 or 3 babies.
From that little bone. All that news.
In all, Beisel will analyze some 25,000 bones. It is a monumental task. After the bones are cleaned, dried, and dipped in an acrylic resin solution to harden them, Beisel begins the process of sorting and reconstruction.
In general, I think they are pretty healthy. I haven't seen some of the gross diseases that I might see. Some of the people who I presume were slaves, show signs of working very, very hard. And they're, of course, not nearly so healthy as some of the other people. Ancient people have beautiful teeth. Even at ages of 35, 40, 45, they have very few cavities and very few abscesses, and all the teeth just lined up like piano keys.
With her trained eye, Beisel is able to unravel a tantalizing mystery about two people found lying together in one of the chambers.
This baby was in the first chamber that we excavated in the back part, and actually before we started taking people out, all you could see was the top of the little head, and it was being held in the arms of a young girl. So we didn't know, we knew it was a baby, but we didn't know too much about it. The men that were working with me all said, this is a baby and its mother and everything, and I looked at the skeleton of the girl holding it. It was a pre-pubertal girl, so I knew it wasn't the mother. So then they all said it must be the sister, but I'll show you, I don't really think it was. This baby was a baby of a rich family because it had jewelry on, and I don't really think that a child that was from a poor family would have jewelry. Now here's the girl that was holding her, and I'll show you why. I don't think she was the sister. Sort of a nice-looking person, isn't she? Nice regular features. But if you look really closely here at these teeth, you can see the line, a really deep line, and the same here on the first molar. Now, this deep indentation into the enamel shows that when the tooth was growing, when this particular part of the tooth was forming, she just simply wasn't getting anything to eat. So that in itself does not point to a girl of a rich family. This is even more telling. The humerus. You see these places here, the attachment for the muscles here on the humor, that's this arm bone. The attachment for the muscle here shows severe pulling of that muscle, which would really only happen in someone who was lifting things that were far too heavy for her to lift. And no daughter of a rich family would have to work like that. So I think she was a slave. So you see that there really was a cross-section of people found on that beach. It wasn't just poor people, there were rich people. You remember the lady with the gold bracelets. So everybody was down there that didn't escape. And they were all there together, and they all died together.
But the central mystery remains. Why had they fled to the beach? By studying the various levels of volcanic debris, Dr. Haraldus Sigurdsson of the University of Rhode Island pieces together Herculaneum's final hours.
The eruption of Vesuvius occurred in two phases. The first phase lasted for about 18 hours and resulted in ash fall over a wide area. During that phase, the wind was blowing from the north, however, so that Herculaneum was spared most of the ash, and here only about 2 inches of ash fell during the first 18 hours of activity. Therefore, the population of Herculaneum was relatively unaware of the potential dangers for the city.
And so many Herculaneans stayed, but their good fortune did not last. Sigurdsson finds evidence of a violent change of events that did not occur until many hours after the ashfall began.
These layers contain important lines of evidence. First of all, carbonized wood or charcoal, indicating temperatures of 200 to 300 degrees centigrade, as well as bricks and other building materials, which indicate high force, perhaps of the order of 100 to 200 kilometers per hour. These layers, therefore, in our interpretation, represent surges. Now, surges are the most deadly phases of volcanic eruptions.
One phase of the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980 was a surge. Unlike slowly advancing lava flows, surges explode with the force and fury of a nuclear bomb blast. Compared to Mount St. Helens, the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD was 10 times more powerful. For 12 hours, Vesuvius hurled into the sky a column of pumice and ash, at times as high as 20 miles. When the column collapsed, it created a surge, a superheated avalanche that blasted through Herculaneum, killing its residents. Immediately after the surge, a slower, moving river of debris called a pyroclastic flow entombed and preserved them. Of the 5 surges that followed, 3 reached Pompeii, but by now most people there had already fled. Herculaneans were not as fortunate. In the ruins of one of Herculaneum's bathhouses, the enormity of the mountain's fury is clear.
This heavy marble bowl was sitting here by the window before the eruption, but when the surge blasted through the window, it picked up the bowl, and the force of the surge threw it across the room, where it left this impression in the volcanic deposit. If you look closely, you'll see impressions which were left by window glass thrown into the bowl when the surge blasted through the window.
As midnight approached, none could comprehend that their world would be snuffed out in one horrifying blow. With the surge bearing down on their town at more than 60 miles an hour, the Herculaneans had less than 5 minutes to flee to the beach, no doubt hoping to escape by sea. When escape became impossible, they ran into the chambers. Scorched by the searing heat of the surge, they suffocated as the gases tore at their lungs. Pyroclastic flows that followed sealed them where they lay, frozen for nearly 2 millennia in the tortured postures of their final moments on this earth. To date, excavations along the ancient beachfront have exposed 10 chambers. But Herculaneum is less than half excavated. It seems certain other chambers, with other dead, remain hidden in the volcanic debris. Because parts of Herculaneum lie buried beneath the homes and shops of Ercolano, they may never see the light of day, never reveal their ancient secrets to the modern world. 7 miles west of Naples is Pozzuoli, the largest town in a region known as the Fiery Fields. The entire region is a caldera formed about 35,000 years ago by a massive eruption. The Fiery Fields are dotted with some 24 vents of smaller volcanoes. The only one still active is on the outskirts of Pozzuoli itself. It is called La Solfatara, sulfur earth. Unable to explain the constant steam and bubbling mud, the ancients thought surely this was an entrance to the underworld. In more recent times, Solfatara was reputedly a source of inspiration for Dante's Inferno. Throughout its history, Solfatara has drawn the attention of laymen and scientists alike.
In the beginning it was pressure and steam, and we cannot enter the area because it's dangerous, because there is a corrosion by the steam of the crater, so there is a possibility of collapse of the grounds.
Today, scientists stand behind a wire fence protected against ground collapse. 70 years ago, they were able to work in this observatory right on the crater's floor. Just beyond the trees at the edge of the crater, one is not prepared for the unlikely sight of campers. Here, for a few thousand lira, a few American dollars, tourists from many countries come to vacation. This unusual piece of real estate has been owned by the De Luca family for more than 100 years. Eugenio De Luca.
Not so many people used to come here to see the volcano because they are afraid. Now they come again. But we, and me personally, we have never been afraid of it. I was sure, we were sure that nothing would happen. I mean, nothing volcanic, you know.
Tourists continue to come with fascination and awe, and no doubt a bit of daring. But just beyond the ridge, thousands of people harbor only deep concern. The uneasy citizens of Pozzuoli live and work with Solfatara as a permanent neighbor. Pozzuoli is a working-class fishing town. 2,000 years ago, like Herculaneum, it was a favorite holiday resort of Italian aristocracy. In its heyday, it was also one of the principal trading centers of the Roman Empire. Now, as then, hawkers pitch their wares. They go about their business, but buyers and sellers alike are keenly aware of another potential danger, this one under their feet. Throughout recorded history, Pozzuoli has been plagued by earthquakes triggered by the rise and fall of magma lying beneath the town. As the magma has risen and fallen, so has the town. At the ancient Roman marketplace, the columns of the Temple of Serapis were above water level when the market was built 2,000 years ago. Now they are marked with the burrows of marine mollusks. Evidence that over the centuries, Serapis has been periodically submerged. As recently as 1976, it was largely flooded. One period of startling uplift occurred in the early 1970s when the ground rose 5.5 feet in only 3 years. Boats that once anchored alongside their docks must now be reached by ladder. Were Pozzuoli not situated near water, the uplift would be more difficult to see. In fact, it was fishermen who first noticed it, as well as the bubbles boiling up from steam vents on the sea floor. If too much pressure builds, the threat is an explosion like the one that formed this mountain in 1538. Preceded by a series of earthquakes, the eruption raised the earth more than 400 feet in just 3 days. On October 4th, 1983, after months of daily tremors, a 4-point earthquake racked Pozzuoli. The older buildings fared the worst. Already weakened by a period of renewed volcanic uplift, many, like this church, all but crumbled into ruin. No one can say how many houses were damaged, but at least half the population moved out. Some in fear, others at government order. With their economy collapsed and schools closed, an estimated 35,000 people were relocated to hotels and temporary camps hastily set up by the government. A population already severely stressed by a year of continuous tremors was now uprooted from the only home most had ever known. In 1985, the volcanic uplift mysteriously stopped, and people began to return to Pozzuoli. Some businesses, their buildings destroyed or deemed unsafe, set up temporary shops in the town's main park. Scientists can neither explain the calm nor guarantee future safety. Many residents still live elsewhere, returning to the town only by day. For fishermen, the best catch is just after dawn. So Rafael Bucciero and many others like him must sleep in Pozzuoli or lose their livelihoods. Working with his son, Vincenzo, every day but Sunday, he hauls in their mile-long net. The bountiful waters are famous for their shellfish, octopus, and squid. Vincenzo has a full-time factory job during the day and has no desire to become a fisherman. But he knows his father needs help with the physically demanding work. Vincenzo has his own family now, but his ties to his parents remain strong. Raphael's wife works perhaps hardest of all to keep family ties intact, traveling daily to Pozzuoli by bus from where she now lives. Annunziata Bucciero is too frightened to stay in the damaged apartment the family once shared. Major efforts are underway to reinforce damaged buildings by injecting new cement into them. But for many people, the chaos and devastation keeps their fear of the quake palpably real. Pozzuoli may be Mrs. Bucciero's birthplace and home, but surrounded by the rubble, she is simply too terrified to spend even one night. To retain some semblance of the family's former life, Mrs. Bucciero has made a ritual of the midday meal. For 2 long years, since their apartment was judged unsafe, the routine has seldom varied. They are fortunate to have inherited from her mother a small ground-level storage room where the family can gather. Making do with a portable gas stove, she takes immense pride in being able to provide for her family as she has for more than 35 years. I was happy, she says. All I cared about was having my family around me. But the earthquake divided us. In a few years, retirement is the goal of Rafael Bucciero, now 61. Until that time, his life remains tied to the rhythm of the sea. He says, we have this cross to bear, my wife and I. Our children are scattered all over. We can't all be together, so we fixed up this little room. My wife and I sacrifice. I fish, and she comes and cooks and cleans. At 1 o'clock, the family is united, the number of people varying from day to day. With their parents today are 1 daughter and 1 son, and their respective fiancés. It is a time to talk and laugh, to eat and drink, and to re-enter each other's world. A time to pretend their family has not been torn apart, and that in 1 short hour, they won't again be forced to go their separate ways.
Ciao.
Before nightfall descends on Pozzuoli, jitneys crowd the marketplace to transport home those like Mrs. Bucciero who live a distance away. My family is everything to me, she says. Alone, late at night, I sometimes cry. After dark, Pozzuoli becomes a veritable ghost town. His net set out for the night, Raphael eats the evening meal his wife has left behind. It's very hard, he says. At my age, where would I go? Pozzuoli has always been our home. Home or not, many residents have been forced by authorities to leave. About 4 miles northwest of Pozzuoli, in a presumably safe zone, the government is building a new town for 20,000 people. Acclaiming it the new Pozzuoli, officials hope it will develop a vital social and economic life. But many residents are doubtful. Isolated from friends and loved ones, they stay only because there's nowhere else to go. Perhaps none are more deeply affected by Pozzuoli's problems than some elderly who are separated from their families and their town. During the quake, she says, the walls were going like this. And I called out to Jesus. The ceiling was shaking, and the smell of cracking plaster was everywhere. It is a trauma for me when I think of when I used to live in Pozzuoli. And it hurts to see it so deserted and convulsed.
Senza nessuno, isolato.
Tutto. Tutto manca.
I miss everything in Pozzuoli. Everything. It is my home.
Dio si vuole.
Generations have been shaken by fear. A new generation waits and wonders when the quakes will strike again. Until now, the fiery field's volcanic uplift has only been monitored on land. But the Gulf of Pozzuoli is also part of the ancient caldera. Professor Lorenzo Mirabile believes a true picture of the phenomenon will only emerge by including a study of the sea floor. His team of scientists from Naples Institute of Oceanography will place instruments at 4 locations on the bottom of the Gulf. Surface buoys will mark their location. The instruments will indicate any uplift of the sea floor by measuring the changes in the height of the water between the bottom and the surface. They will also monitor water temperature and seismic activity, taking into account such variables as currents, tides, and storms. Solar-powered radio transmitters relay the data to a centralized computer on shore. The signals from the Gulf are received at 5-minute intervals, 24 hours a day. But Mirabile believes it will take at least a year to accumulate enough data to even determine what is critical uplift and what is not. Then he hopes the information, in combination with the findings of geologists and volcanologists, can be used to develop an early warning system to alert Pozzuoli before disaster strikes. The fiery fields are home to 200,000 people, Greater Naples to 2 million. The evacuation of such numbers poses astronomical problems. Yet without doubt, Vesuvius is still active. It will erupt again. The most recent eruption in 1944 was filmed by the Allied troops that had recently liberated war-torn Naples. Relentlessly for 3 days, the lava rolled over farmlands and vineyards, moving ever closer to the town of San Sebastiano. Lying just 3 miles below Vesuvius's central crater, San Sebastiano has historically been an easy target. Nearly every generation living here since the early 19th century has seen their town destroyed. Even their patron saint seemed helpless against the onslaught. Miraculously, only 2 people died, but 2/3 of the buildings were totally destroyed. Most of the population was homeless. 200 yards wide, the solidified lava flow remains today as a vivid reminder of San Sebastiano's perilous hours. One man remembers well. 19 at the time of the eruption, Rafael Capasso would go on to become mayor of San Sebastiano, a position he has held for 31 years. For his 10-year-old niece, he recalls the events of 1944 as the lava advanced and inundated the town. Could it erupt again, she asks. Yes, he replies. The volcano has been sleeping now for 42 years. We've never seen it sleep that long before. But, he goes on, we must rely on scientists to alert us in time. Under Mayor Capasso's leadership, San Sebastiano today is a thriving, bustling town. As a young man, it was he who urged the townspeople not to abandon their city, but to rebuild. And rebuild they did, right on top of the lava. What might be an ominous reminder of past horrors stands as unofficial monument to a people's tenacity and pride. Mayor Capasso, often quoted as saying, "The power of man is greater than the power of the volcano," has turned San Sebastiano into a showcase city. Before the eruption, some 4,000 people lived here. Today, that figure has more than doubled. And San Sebastiano is but one of 14 towns that crowd the slopes of Vesuvius. Twice every year, those living in Vesuvius's shadow throng to Naples Cathedral, the Duomo, in anticipation of an ages-old ritual, the miracle of San Gennaro, their patron saint. San Gennaro, martyred in 305 AD, is said to have saved the region from famines, plagues, and cholera. But perhaps most importantly, he is its protector against the might of Vesuvius. A small amount of his dried blood is stored in the Duomo. The faithful believe it must turn to liquid today to ensure Naples' safety from Vesuvius for another year. Occasionally, the miracle has not occurred. For instance, in 1979. Then, in 1980, the region suffered a devastating earthquake from which it is still recovering. Nearly 3,000 died. 100,000 were homeless. The miracle has happened. Vesuvius, the devout believe, will not harm them for another year. They offer prayers of thanks. This land holds their roots. It is their beloved home. And once again, San Gennaro has assured them it is safe. With renewed faith on this bright and hopeful day, it is a time to reflect, to look to the future, and to celebrate. Yet even as they rejoice, the faces of the present hauntingly evoke the faces of the past. The faces of the living are reflected in the faces of the dead. In 1632, the Viceroy of Naples warned, "Children and children's children, hear. I warn you now, sooner or later this mountain takes fire. Flee so long as you can." And yet people still return to the slopes of the mountain, even to build new towns farther up its broad and fertile flanks. In years to come, scientists will continue to be drawn to the towns of Vesuvius, to probe more deeply the mysteries of the past, to ponder the fate of those whose lives were lost. Perhaps today the power of man has become greater than the volcano. Perhaps science does hold hope for a future when nature can at last be tamed. Ultimately, perhaps, it may be the indomitable human spirit that will prevail. Those in the shadow of Vesuvius have been called courageous by some, foolhardy by others. The judgment is history's to decide. For now, only this is sure. If Holocaust is only dimly feared, its specter nevertheless remains. Long after the sun has disappeared from the sky, a mountain's shadow continues to fall.